Well, thank you everyone for being here. It's we're starting right on time, so we're back on schedule. We were a little behind this morning. I hope you guys are enjoying. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Yeah. My name is Santiago Saltos. I am the chairman of the conference, Alta CCMA and MRO. It's a real pleasure for me to be here at this session. We're very excited to host this new that we're adding to the conference. So thank you for being here and trusting on this new thing that we're trying to implement. So I'm gonna allow each of my fellow panelists here to introduce themselves. If we can start with you, Eric.
Yeah. Hi, Eric Hogenkamp, Senior Vice President, Air Lease Corporation. Been with Air Lease since 2010, which is kind of the start of the Air Lease Corporation. Before that was with ILFC, also in Los Angeles, and worked there with Jaime. But since then, he's joined Air Lease Corporation as well.
Hello, Jose Jaime Marquez with Air Lease Corporation, also part of ILFC and AirCap, responsible for transitions, aircraft transitions, and engineering.
Thank you, Jaime and Eric. Thank you for being here. So before we start, we want to give you a little bit of the introduction, why we came, why are we here, why are we discussing this topic. ALTA has different working committees formed by subject matter experts in different areas. And one of the areas that we have within the, let's say, the maintenance department, we had a fleet management team. The fleet management was in charge of mainly addressing this issue. We've seen that the Latin American airlines are losing a lot of money within the process of returning aircraft. So with that said, we wanted to, we have been doing some work within the airlines, and which I'm going to discuss as we speak, and it has been a learning process for us, mainly considering that the process of leasing return, it's out there, but the way that airlines have been handling it was very different. So it has been a very interesting learning process for us. And when we were speaking with the steering committee of the supplier steering committee of CCMA, they were mentioning us that the MROs also and different organizations around the maintenance are very interested because they are part of the equation. So with that said, we want to have this session to discuss a little bit about, from your perspective as a leasing company, one of the biggest leasing companies in the world, how you guys, what do you guys see? You guys work with different companies, different regions around the world. So we want to learn a little bit about what are the best practices, what you would like to see. And from the airline perspective, we also want to share to you what are the issues that we're seeing. Latin America, as we've discussed in the morning, it has its own issues. It's a complicated region, regulatory mostly speaking, and definitely it's interesting to share different aspects where in the end what we want with this is to provide or come up with potential solutions that can become a win-win scenario for air lease companies, MROs, and airlines. So with that, I wanted to ask you, well, we were discussing a little before, we were actually having our own panel session ourselves, and sorry about that. And I wanted to ask you a little bit, what has been your experience working right now in Latin America, and where do you see the areas of opportunities that we can start addressing and we can start working on?
I think the opportunities are, it's not just Latin America, it's kind of a global. I think the leasing return process is kind of consistent all the way through, no matter where you are. From 2014 to 2017 on scheduled returns, the way we work, we've probably on average had about a 6-day delay from scheduled return to actual redelivering the airplane. So within a week, we can, make sure that the aircraft goes to the next lessee. part of that success is because the active participation from us as a lessor. It also requires us to engage with the airline, engage with the decision makers, to have the connections with the MRO. So there's a lot of different ways we can improve, and I think maybe our experience in Latin America has been maybe the lack of preparation, the lack of planning of the lease return early on, because depending on the complexity, you could start planning 12 months in advance of the return to make sure that these issues that there's awareness of the issues, that the MRO knows it's not a regular C-check, that it's going to be a return check, that the certification of the aircraft is managed. If you have time, you can manage it. If you come to these surprises at the last minute, you're going to have another delay. So there's a lot of efficiencies that you can have by just better project management discussion, and also to be engaging with the decision makers.
Well, we've learned that when we started this program, and for us it was a very eye-opening thing to know that the airlines, we have different departments within the airline that handle the whole process, from the initial contract, that's the initial contact, I say, with the lessee, then all the process from the legal part, the fleet management part, the maintenance guys, even the purchasing guys. So part of what we've learned is that sometimes within the problem originates within the airline, because sometimes the people that are not involved in the process or that do not have the expertise are the ones that sign sometimes the lease. Do you guys see that as a problem?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Because especially in Latin America, where for the most part many operators follow FAA or FAA guidelines, and at many a time the lease language for the return conditions might say the aircraft must be returned to EASA compliant. You'd be amazed how many times the airline will not be aware that though the aircraft was maintained maybe under an FAA umbrella, that contractually the aircraft had to return EASA compliant. And obviously by the time they find out, or the aircraft's in the hangar, then that creates a hell of a problem for the airline, because now they've got to make it compliant to an EASA requirement. And so once again, it's really the awareness of not only the regulatory issues, but it's also awareness from a contractual standpoint. What are the returning conditions?
I mean, we've seen that many of our aircraft are originated in EASA, but they operate in Latin America and they go under FAA regulatory conditions. What would be your recommendations on how airlines can be better prepared to address these facts when they come to this issue in the process?
Again, time, to start early, start planning, have the discussion with the lessor, to find solutions. And we have a lot of solutions that we've implemented before. So to get our advice about what might be the good way or a satisfactory way to comply with the return condition, again, having that discussion. And sometimes the fleet planning may not be talking with the engineering in the airline, which may not be talking to the MRO, which if the airplane's not in-house, it might be external. So again, not having a consistent communication path in the airline. And typically as a lessor, we only have one point of contact. We rely on that airline's point of contact to disseminate the information across the organization, which doesn't always happen correctly. It's fragmented. And
right.
Again, these inefficiencies cause delays.
So we're talking, that we're seeing that, of course, the lack of planning affects all these issues. From your perspective, what have you done in order to, I don't know if the word or the right word would be to educate or to team up with the airline? What's something that you guys have seen within your experience that has worked well?
We typically try to schedule meetings 12 months out, minimum 12 months out with the airline to go over the return conditions, to ensure they are aware of what the return conditions are. Like I said, that's what we try to do. I'm sure many lessors have the same type practice. But once again, it's talking to the key folks that have the responsibility and have the financial, power to make something to meet the return conditions. I think that's one of the biggest challenges, is that obviously the returning airline is going to try to meet the return conditions, but meet them to the minimum standard. On the other side, we got a receiving airline that's asking for for a very good aircraft, right?
Right.
So we will mitigate. We will definitely try to mitigate those expectations from both the returning and the receiving. But really, it's just the awareness. Once again, going back to the key term of being aware that what the return conditions are and what it needs to take from the MRO standpoint, from the authority standpoint, the returning authority, the receiving authority's requirements, all that needs to be bridged.
And we have, well, most of our audience right now, it's come from the MRO, from the MRO industry. What it would be how can you be better partner with MROs based on what you've experienced so far?
What historically the lessors are kind of removed from those type of relationships. The airline is responsible to select the MRO. They're responsible for the engine maintenance. They're responsible for all these tasks. So as a lessor, sometimes we don't have the right connections on the maintenance side because that's not what we want to do on a daily basis. So to have the MRO involved in the lease return process, I think would allow us to have more efficiencies. Scheduling manpower for them to understand the work scope in a timely manner. Then you have the supply chain issue when things are overlooked or there's constraints and maybe a lack of supply of certain parts, because these are not the typical on-the-shelf parts that you're ordering for lease return. They're very much heavy on the cabin, on the galleys, on the seats, not the rotable components that you typically help use to support a regular C-check. So again, to have a strong relationship with the MRO definitely helps. But also the sub-suppliers. We get involved with the Boeing and Airbus relationship because we have strong relationships with them. But to go down to like a sub-supplier, those are challenges for us because we typically don't have that network that the airline has.
Well, definitely, it's a key. It's a partnership, and we've seen it from the airlines that sometimes we are missing that part and not getting the whole team complete. And from what I'm seeing, from what you're mentioning a little of the issues that this can end up and become a real factor that can affect the whole process. But going a little bit into detail, based on what you have seen as best practices, maybe from some other airlines, what can you share with us that you can think that it would be a right direction for airlines to implement within the process of planning before redelivering an aircraft?
IATA has published a nice reference document that talks about the returning of aircraft, the transition of aircraft. And I think that document itself provides some good guidelines, at least from a very high level as far as what would be the expectations for the return of the aircraft. But in essence, just to recognize that the return process, it's not a normal C-check. It's not a check. The cabin, the interior, everything is going to be looked at, and the airline must be prepared to address those issues. And not only the airline, but the MRO must be also in a position with the supply chain management to support those type of products, have the back shops in place to take an aircraft for a return check to an MRO that's not prepared to support the aircraft in its totality is the beginning of maybe not the right path.
What? Thank you for that. I know that perhaps any of you, if you're interested in making a comment, please do so. I forgot to mention that initially. We want this to be as interactive as possible. Maybe there are some questions that arise when anything that we have talked so far, or comments.
Can we just ask how many are airlines here and how many are suppliers? I think it would be good to kind of get at the perspective. How many airlines? Bingo. That's the problem.
Are you done?
Yeah. They all doing a mini meeting.
Yes.
I have a question. How do you guys look now with this memo from the European CFMI engine return with PMA and how is it? Sorry.
That was one of the you brought ahead one of the points that we wanted to to discuss. We've been discussing about that. We had an interesting topic about that, but I want to ask you.
I think it was fantastic, the decision and the agreement. The point is, nobody invited you guys to be there.
Yeah, I think if you look at our contracts, is we do have a prohibition on PMA in the engine, and that's really just to echo the attitude of the engine manufacturers. So again, for us to have a asset that is fluid and global, we need to have the lowest common denominator, which is if that's what the market wants, then that's what we will implement from our contract.
Just to add to your comment, Eric, a lot of those constraints come also from the financing that comes along with the aircraft. So if the bank, whatever banks or financing companies that are financing the aircraft to the airline or to the lessor put those constraints of the non-PMA or many of the other maintenance constraints that we force on the airlines.
And just to comment on that too, from PMA process is an airworthy. The PMA part is an airworthy part. It's a part that's been approved by the authority. We as lessors don't want to be policemen as far as what part is good and what part is bad. If it's an airworthy part, it's an airworthy part. But as Eric's mentioned, the issue is the transferability of the asset and the value of the asset, right? If and when a country issues PMA that we might not feel comfortable with, or not to pick on any country around the world, would your authority accept it? Well, that's the question, and the question is, how do we remove that? So, as Eric meant, the common denominator from the engine perspective is to negate PMA parts from the engine. The problem is you don't want to subject the value or the transferability of that asset.
Well, I'm going to comment on that, and that was kind of what we were talking before lunch. And I think the issue behind the value of an asset, using PMA or not using PMA, it's part of the lack of education there is. A piece that works, as you are saying, it's a completely approved part, and if it isn't approved, it's because it gives the same service as an OEM part. The concept that it devaluates, or the concept that it's not a proper part for it is mainly because of the misconception there is around PMA parts. Just the fact that the part has a less price doesn't mean it has less value.
No, true. I mean, there's good PMA, there's bad PMA, and from a lessor perspective, and we could go, to a large avionics supplier and buy a part directly from them, and it comes with a PMA tag, but it's the same part number that we originally got on the aircraft from production. So I mean, there's a education of PMA of what is good and bad. The specific question for engines, there's not much tolerance in there, because that becomes an issue with the engine manufacturers when you take to the shop, or subject to their care agreements that they have. But for airframe parts or non-critical parts, cabin parts, modification parts, there is some tolerance for PMA in there. But again, it's again having that discussion with the lessor to see, to what extent can we open the door and have some PMA considerations. Typically, if it's in the IPC and it's a licensed PMA, that's a good way to reduce costs, but not diminish the value, because it's already a pre-approved configuration.
Right, and that I agree with it. Talking about there are different, let's say, barriers that we get when we as airlines want to continue pushing forward to the use of PMAs. And right now, actually, the technical guys are having a discussion on how to take to the next step the CFM or the PMA agreement from IATA to the next level, because we're pushing for that. The airlines are going to move forward in that direction. And what we would want as airlines, there's some comments on how airlines or why some lease companies don't take PMAs. Sometimes they say because the airline that's going to take the plane is not going to want PMAs, and the airlines are much going towards that area. So there's definitely a lot of misconception out there, and I think there's a lot of work that we need to keep on doing. I I appreciate you for saying that the problem is not the PMA itself, but there's still some work that I know that you guys have a lot of barriers that perhaps are not allowing you to say and move forward to a free PMA use or a flexibility to use in the aircraft.
But it doesn't start with the lessor. I mean, it starts with standardization across the industry to retrain people to understand what's good and what's bad. Again, to work with the OEMs to understand really what their constraints are about having certain type of PMAs. So it's not just because we enforce the policy doesn't make us necessarily the solution to the problem.
But remember, the PMAs is a process of a certification path. Right now, when we look from a lessor and we look for the transferability of an asset of an aircraft across different regions, right? And you look at as simple as an STC, an FAA-STC. So many countries now don't accept FAA-STCs. They have to revalidate them, right? China has to revalidate an STC. Malaysia, Brazil, everybody has to revalidate an STC. So in essence, they're saying they want to go look at it. PMAs follow the same path. So in essence, the industry or the authorities themselves are also questioning, could possibly question the validity of a PMA part. Because once again, revalidation of all these certification paths is something that we all kind of do. The industry has imposed it. Right? So from an asset and from a protection for a transferability, move that aircraft from one jurisdiction to the next. That's how the lessors look at it.
And that's where we come in. Organizations are just like ALTA, IATA is working on it. We've seen this morning, the airline's structure today, the cost is it's very critical in terms of its cost structure. We are seeing Latin America, the impact that's having on our legacy carriers. So definitely the cost, to find ways where we can save costs, maintenance is a big part. We were discussing this is not probably the solution for the maintenance, but every dime and every cent counts. So that's where organizations like ALTA, we can partner with our airlines, with our other members of the aviation community to move forward and keep pushing and educating. Because we understand, especially in Latin America, our regulators, we have had in the past years, we've had a decrease on the our regulators have lost many powers within their capability. They don't have enough people that are trained. They don't have enough people that are aware of how advancing technology is. Many of our countries are still back in the 20th century, where most of their authorities come from the military, and they are still seeing things 20th century. It sounds like past century, but it is a reality, and we see all these barriers. So that's where organizations like ALTA are looking forward to keep working together and have this type of conversations where we can bring solutions and try to help. Because in the end, you guys want to lease more aircraft. We want to fly more passengers. You guys want to sell more parts. And the only way that we're going to be able to do that is by working together and try to mitigate the problems that we are facing right now.
Yeah, but again, if we, like I said, the prior success we had about being able to be within 6 days of the target return to the actual return, I mean, that should be the goal.
Yeah.
That's where you will save the money. That's where we all work together toward that goal, which is, that will be probably the number one cost efficiency that you can have as all the stakeholders in the room, especially for the airlines,
right,
is working toward that type of a environment, because there's a lot of delays or not having a part or the lack of planning, which would just increase the cost. Of course, you could have the C-check well planned, you get everything well planned, but just one item can throw the whole project out the window, and your costs go through the roof. So I would look at more efficiencies as solving the problem, not so much the PMA or.
No, I agree, and it's not that we want to divert that discussion, and yes, going back to our origin, but that's part of it. That's part of the equation, and seeing how we can come up with also partnering this in the main part of the whole process. I want to open to see if anybody have any comments.
Just a quick question. How do you determine determine the appropriate service bulletin implementation level? Like, is it at the system level, the component level? Like, if someone leases an aircraft 8-10 years ago, how do you determine what the requirement is for a component or a system that it has to be at a certain service bulletin implementation level? Is that considered as part of your contract, or how do you?
Most of the time, we'll
what's
look.
the requirement?
Typically, we'll look at a alert service bulletin as being kind of the minimum. The alert service bulletin, which drives into kind of a safety requirements with respect to reliability.
To an AD?
It may or may not yet be an AD, but yeah, typically alert will kind of has that context of safety. With respect to reliability service bulletins, there's no real way for us to, enforce that. We just tell them to kind of use like a non-discrimination practice where they will just treat our aircraft just like they would do the rest of the fleet with the service bulletin implementation.
Yeah, remember, the airworthiness criteria is for the returning lessee, right? They have to give us an airworthy aircraft back. So whatever level of SB that is, that's where it needs to be. If it's better, if there's higher levels available, then that's great. But under the lease return, it has to be airworthy. It could be a lesser level revision of an SB.
I believe we had another question over here. Or two. We had first here, and then we'll go back.
I was just getting back to the preparation. I would think 12 months out might be almost too late if they have a maintenance event. They could have done something before. I'm not familiar with the IATA document you referred to, but wouldn't it just be a good best practice to have a checklist? Something for the flow down during the course of after you sign the lease for the airlines to be able to flow down to their respective organizations that says, here's the expectation, so it gets built into the maintenance practices for that aircraft.
That's what we call our return conditions. I mean, pretty much it
Yeah.
is somewhat of a checklist which says, and you can disseminate that through multiple organizations, but it doesn't happen. The fleet management or planning has a copy of it, but the engineering maintenance may not have it. The engine department may not have a copy of it. So, again, the lack of sharing and those efficiencies would help.
Yeah, it just seems like you have a meeting 12 months out, and you should have a meeting within 3 months in of signing the lease.
You can start planning from day one, and we encourage airlines to start thinking about the lease return as soon as they take the airplane, especially with their record keeping, with the certification basis of mods and repairs.
Eric Jaime. So, I'm echoing the working together, 12 months out, perfect. That's what we need. The main problem that we as a cabin supplier facing is, okay, we don't know where the airplane is going 12 months out. We have to do a lot of work with cabin modifications, seat LOPA changes, IFE additions or removal. How do you think we can work better together? Because it's very important that we start working 12 months prior to this lease return, but we don't know where this airplane is going, or you don't want to divulge yet where this airplane is going. So I'm going like, how do you think we can make it work better together in that respect?
Well, I guess it's kind of two steps, right? The one is the returning airline has to meet the obligation, so they can start working with you. And really, it's the airline returning that has the obligation to work with its network of maintenance and suppliers to get the aircraft to meet the return condition. Part two is the modification, if we need to make any customizations for the next airline. And that's really a lessor responsibility. And I think from our practices, as soon as we know, we get involved because we know what it will take to go from A to B. And we like to start as early as we can, and we have no reason not to.
Narrow bodies are typically not as big a challenge as the wide bodies are, right? Specifically from the IFE cabin standpoint. The wide bodies, we could have a session alone on wide body transitions. Because the dynamics are so big, you end up with a 10, 12-year-old interior. And at that point, let me tell you, most IFE companies are not even supporting the IFE anymore. So from a lesser perspective, we have to face the music. Either do we find enough of the IFE equipment out there in the used market? Are the seats even built anymore? So it's a domino effect, right? So, but the point you're taking, it's well taken, is that we try to start as soon as we can. As wide bodies progress in age, they all go from a highly branded interior to a less branded interior in a higher density configuration, right? It's the path that most aircraft take. So we have the challenge of, not only from a technical standpoint, we have the challenge as owners as far as the investment. Do we want to invest, or how much do we want to invest into an older asset? And blah, blah, blah. You know, it just continues from that point forward.
And also on the supplier side, what we also see challenges is that there's 2 points of contact. The airline has a point of contact and the leasing company has a point of contact. And the supplier side, they don't always talk to each other. And that's also, sometimes a big frustration from our side, because, it doesn't have the efficiencies because we're not all on the same page. Or they're very protective of the data, or it's a hard time for us to get some data to make modifications, or maybe from the airline side it could be equally difficult to get some data for a new configuration that they're trying to implement.
And one last point on that. Typically, from the lessor's perspective, we're not transitioning fleets, right? We're transitioning one airplane. So the NRE cost to transition one aircraft from an interior CAD standpoint is a massive amount of cash. Not only that, many companies, I'm talking the big IFE companies and C companies, won't even want to talk to us for one aircraft, right? It's not worth their effort. So this is where, other suppliers in the supply chain management help and come in on the transition of those type of aircraft. Because one airplane deals for the big IFE seat manufacturers, they have no interest in those type of programs.
Thank you.
Great. We have time for another question. No? Well, is there? Well, I'm taking a lot of this, and it kind of aligns with what we as ALTA were trying to do with the airlines, and try how equip better our airlines to do a better team with you. Is there any final comments that you would like to share?
I think we just need to continue the discussion, and have more airline participation would be, again, helpful, because it starts with their education, it starts with their commitment to get the return on time as well, and again, work with us, work with the suppliers, work with the maintenance organizations, and then they need to be participating in this discussion.
And to echo that too, I think one of the things that we have done through different organizations or different efforts, and I'll mention Boeing, we've now got Boeing to ask the question anytime an airline sends in a service request, to ask the question if it's a lease transition. Because Boeing's reaction on how they're going to react, and how, what type, to knowing that it's going to be a lease transition, it really changes their response time. Not only that, but it also changes the type of response. And I think from all of us supporting the airlines moving aircraft, especially when they're going to a check, to ask the question, is this a lease transition? Because the whole thing is going to change from the interior standpoint, from the component standpoint, from the time. If you're an MRO, if you're telling your guy's going to take 10, 15, 20 days, better add another 10, 15 days to it if it's a lease transition, right? Not just to call it.
Well, I really take in that, and I appreciate. Thank you for that. From us, we know this is just a first step, as we discussed. We want to partner. We want to meet with you. We want to have the airlines here, and the airlines are interested in being here. Not that because they're not here is not because they're not interested. It's because we're very happy to see that there is an interest from you guys of having this type of sessions. But unfortunately, we cannot get all the airlines. We can get them all out of their office. We have the bosses in maintenance. We have the guys in purchasing, the fleet management. Some of them are here. Unfortunately, we can't get them all. But we are looking into take this to a next step. Take this to a committee where we can discuss more in detail and find these solutions. So I want to thank you, gentlemen, for being here, for coming. I think this is your first CCMA.
Yes.
So I hope you guys are enjoying it. Hope that this is not the last time we see you, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you.